Hi, I'm Marcin Kuśmierczyk. Welcome to Eastern Insights. Why does Eastern Europe's perspective on global affairs matter? Because here, history and geopolitics collide in ways that shape our world. Yet these voices often go unheard. This podcast bridges this gap. Each episode translates in-depth analysis from my Polish YouTube channel, Polityka Zagraniczna, which means international politics. For the last few years, this platform has dissected foreign policy, security, and the forces shaping Eastern Europe. Using AI tools like 11 Labs, we adapt these nuanced insights into English, preserving their depth while making them accessible to all. Whether we're unpacking Russia's latest moves, EU debates, or security challenges in Central Europe, our mission is simple: to foster informed dialogue by sharing Eastern Europe's untold stories. If you're curious about the world beyond headlines, subscribe now. Join me as we decode the complexities of global affairs, one Eastern European insight at a time.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the podcast. I'm really excited you're here because today we're diving headfirst into something huge, something that's going to shape the very future of our continent. We're kicking off a massive multi-episode, multi-month series, and my hope is that together we'll uncover all the intricate details of the negotiations that will define Europe's new political and economic landscape. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Budget negotiations in the European Union? Sounds a little dry. And you're not wrong. It is tough to get truly excited about something that, on the surface, seems so, boring. But please, just give me a chance, because if I can properly illustrate the true stakes of this game, I promise you'll see that it's not just about some distant policy, it's about your future too. This topic, the EU budget, is pretty special to me. It's a cyclical event, yes, but it only happens every 7 years. And I vividly remember delving into the intricacies of the last budget and how it completely transformed European policy. Sometimes, it feels like we need to step back and gain a broader perspective, to break away from the immediate headlines and truly see the colossal changes that have unfolded in European policy, all thanks to those negotiations 7 years ago. Think about it. How different are the relationships now between European institutions, between the European Commission and the member states? What did the common European debt lead to? What huge political shifts have taken place on our continent because of those very negotiations? So this really underscores just how crucial this process is. It literally programs European policy for the next few years. But for me, it's also a personal opportunity to thank you. It's about recognizing just how long we've been on this journey together. Thank you for being here, because your presence allows me to do this kind of work. It means you believe your time is well spent watching this type of analysis, and I'll do my absolute best to continue to earn your attention and your time through the reliability and merit of my work, now and in the future. All right. Enough preamble. Let's get down to business. Over the next few months, we're going to break this all down into its core components. We'll map out where the individual factions, parties, and interest groups stand within this massive Europe-wide dispute. But first, 2 critical points. It's going to be really important for me to highlight the enormous threats facing Poland as part of this process. How can we be united and strategic? Well, the starting point has to be the European Commission. Because in European politics, the Commission is the force that initiates legislation. They're the ones, colloquially speaking, who throw the ball into the game. The Commission actually kicked off this whole process by proposing the budget frameworks. And if these frameworks were to come to fruition, it would lead to a very deep and radical reconstruction of the European political system. Now, Ursula von der Leyen, thoughtful. She's a politician who's easy to underestimate, right? There's a perceived inconsistency about her. That's precisely why she became the head of the Commission. The Council, essentially the member states, hoped that her seemingly weak personal position would make her easy to control. Yet it was this woman who first significantly expanded the scope of the European Commission's political possibilities. And then, she masterfully navigated the process of forming a new cabinet, for instance, by removing the influential French commissioner, Thierry Breton. Breton, by the way, later nicknamed her the Imperial von der Leyen because she now wields a power that no other head of the Commission could have even dreamed of. According to critics, often voicing their opinions in outlets like Politico, crucial decisions for the entire continent started being made by a small group of non-elected von der Leyen advisors. They're called conciliaries, a term that, well, usually refers to people advising mafia bosses. From the future of the European Union's industrial policy to international relations, like China-related policy, the head of the Commission wants to play a decisive role in every important matter. And the next budget will be fundamental for the ongoing centralization of power within the Commission. Von der Leyen will first have to quash a rebellion on the Commission's own board regarding the long-term financial framework, and then she'll push to expand her competencies even further, through tighter and wider control over the distribution of EU money. That rebellion on the Commission's board? It was because even the commissioners themselves weren't in the loop about the new budget's specifics. It was presented to them simply for acceptance. This whole project was crafted by a small group of von der Leyen's trusted employees. There was a sharp disagreement, and the case was even covered by the Financial Times. Maybe we don't need to get into all those Brussels details, but it clearly shows that von der Leyen is already facing resistance in enforcing this law within her own institution. And, on top of that, she still has to fight in the European Parliament and secure the approval of all member states. Okay, so what project, what budget are we actually talking about? The budget's assumptions are of course available on EU websites. But here's something interesting. At the time of recording this, it was only available in 3 languages: English, French, and German. However, that's really no excuse for the fact that nearly every analysis of this topic I've encountered in Poland isn't based on the source text itself. Instead, they're reinterpretations, filtered through the lens of some political party, or based on shallow summaries found in Western media. Now, alongside the original source text, I also looked at appearances by von der Leyen and Piotr Serafin, the Polish commissioner responsible for the budget in the European Parliament. Since we're just at the beginning of these negotiations, it doesn't make sense to analyze specific amounts or percentages right now. The key thing is to understand the proposed mechanism behind this massive reconstruction of Europe's political system. The Commission argues that EU funds are too complicated, far too complicated. The sheer abundance of funding sources, goals, and institutions means no one can truly navigate it, and finances aren't spent optimally. So, they say it's time for significant simplification. Von der Leyen wants most of the money from traditional EU programs, like cohesion policy, to fall under the umbrella of a broad new tool called National and Regional Partnership Plans. But let's skip the Brussels jargon and confusing terms for a moment. In practice, this is all about imposing political supervision from the European Commission on all EU funds. Access to money from these plans will be conditional on reforms. Funding won't be an automatic consequence of earlier negotiations. Instead, it will depend on whether or not you meet the European Commission's requirements. Reform as a requirement. This is an absolute novelty. And I know it might sound like I'm trying to stir up emotions or play on fear right now, but I have to be honest. I can't pretend I didn't read this. This type of connection between reform and financing will serve, for example, to pressure states into implementing a migration pact. And the European Commission states it quite plainly. I quote, "Connecting reforms with investments will provide member states with stronger incentives to implement a pact on migration and asylum." Further in the same context, we read about climate neutrality and the social goals of the European Union. You can probably see what this is all about. According to this project, the European budget is set to become a tool through which the European Commission will gain financial leverage. Leverage that will be used to pressure member states into implementing the European political agenda. So, this is an expansion of the operational rules from national reconstruction plans to the entire budget, packaged under a new term, partnership programs. And yes, it's also intended to exert pressure on migration. This is something the European Commission itself communicates in its documents and openly acknowledges. But that's not all, of course. The key word in the Commission's project is flexibility. The idea is that the European Commission could react to future crises that are impossible to predict today. Hence, colloquially speaking, the European Commission would have relatively loose funds to use in emergencies. Here, a rather vague postulate also appears. The Commission would have the right to mobilize new funds, even up to 400 billion euros, and all this for a long time. Now, I must admit, I couldn't find this specific record in the documents. Perhaps I missed it. However, both von der Leyen and Pietro Serafin have spoken about it. In general, the communication around this entire law has been, frankly, annoyed, disastrous. But maybe we'll get into that in a moment. the rule of law also returns, which will be an essential condition for obtaining EU funds. Of course, this is the rule of law as understood by the European Commission. It's worth adding here that von der Leyen actually lost to the European Court of Justice in a negotiation with Pfizer. The court ruled that she had no right to conceal correspondence with the company. Yet, despite the ruling, the European Commission still hasn't revealed this correspondence. In any case, in the context of the budget, von der Leyen stated that all plans will be smartly conditioned by the rule of law. In the project, we'll also find a new program called Agora, through which the Commission wants to subsidize media and non-governmental organizations. And circling back to systemic issues, we absolutely have to talk about debt. When Europe first embarked on the path of joint debt, I tried to make a few things clear to you. I said it would rebuild the European Union's political system, that it would change the relations between member states and European institutions, and that has certainly become very clear. But I also told you that this wasn't a one-time thing. It wasn't an event that would change the European Union just once. No, it was the start of a process that will continue to reshape the European Union into the future.
And why? Because it's not just about how you secure a loan and distribute the money. It's also incredibly important how you pay back that loan. And now, we've reached that point. When it comes to this issue, in my opinion, two things are important at this stage. First, there's the proposal for a new tool to be called Catalyst Europe, the European Catalyst. In a nutshell, it's meant to be a tool that allows a state to draw on European debt, or debt based on the European budget. It's about embedding the possibility of borrowing under favorable conditions within the European budget. And that would be truly extremely important, because it would be the final end to the charade that debt is some one-time unique solution that the European Union has only used once. It hasn't used it once or for only one purpose, and now something like this should be included in the long-term financial framework of the European Union. But to be honest, I'm not surprised that it's so vague, so bluntly colloquial so far, because it's difficult for me to imagine that there would be agreement among the member states on these types of mechanisms, at least in the form in which it was described. But in any case, the second issue is that the time has come to pay off the debts the Union has incurred on the budget of previous programs designed to stimulate the economy. This means the Union needs more money, and the member states don't want to increase their direct contributions to the European Union. And so, we get own resources. That's what the European Union calls it. Generally, the word tax is so overused in politics everywhere, isn't it? If someone wants to impose some taxes, they call them a payment, a contribution. In the Union, it's called own resources, but it's about taxes that are intended to go directly to the European Union. Part of the money from the ETS, that's the well-known carbon dioxide emissions trading system, is to go to the budget. A new nicotine tax has also been proposed. As Commissioner Serafin explained, this mainly concerns new products that have appeared on the market in recent years. In the Commission's proposals, we'll also find a tax on electronic waste. But what's extremely important, the idea of a corporate tax has appeared. So far, it's aimed at large companies with an income exceeding 100 million euros. As you can see, the debt issue leads to the need for repayment. The need for debt repayment leads to the need for new taxes. And new taxes, collected or approved and collected by the European Union, fundamentally change the character of this organization. And this will continue. The more tools of this type, the more the European Union will transform. This institution will be something completely different in a few years than it is today, or than it was during previous budget negotiations. And I know this material is already packed with confusing terms, slogans, and what I call typical Brussels talk. In a moment, we'll move on to what, in my opinion, is truly important from a Polish perspective. But there's one more term we need to discuss: the Competition Fund. This is a new tool, one of the key pillars of the entire budget. And this is where all the popular issues like the development of the arms and space industry, the promotion of European champions, the scaling of European companies, innovations and technologies related to zero emissions are supposed to live. However, the division of money clearly shows that the priorities lie elsewhere. In short, under the name of the Competition Fund, there's a new industrial policy of the European Union. This is where new digital technologies, defense industry, dual-use technologies, and space technologies will be promoted. The principles of how this fund will operate aren't entirely clear yet. In general, a lot about this budget consists of ideas that are either not refined or whose shape isn't agreed upon. The way this budget has been communicated is, frankly, quite disastrous. I mean, this budget was catastrophically received. Many member states have already officially expressed their opposition. In the European Parliament, to be honest, I haven't seen anything like this before. Polish Commissioner Piotr Serafin was, and I apologize for the colloquialism, but he was crushed in the European Parliament. I don't remember such a debate. No stone was left unturned on this budget, both in terms of its communication, its generality, its vocabulary, and in terms of what this budget actually is and what its postulates are. I've never had the pleasure of meeting Mr. Piotr Serafin, but I truly felt sorry for him, on a human level, because you could see he was exposed to tasks that had to end this way. It was genuinely unpleasant. There are still a few aspects of the budget I haven't mentioned here. There's a program called Global Europe, but you know what? Let's leave the details for now. Because I think there's enough already about the budget, and I want to move on to what, in my opinion, is crucial from a Polish perspective. Again, I want to emphasize that when it comes to individual states, and especially the parties in the European Parliament, all of that will be the subject of our future discussions. But we have time for that.
Now what, in my opinion, is really important? Or what are the very serious threats from a Polish perspective? In Poland, EU funds have become almost godlike. The state of the Polish public debate about money coming from the European Union is truly dramatic. For a large part of Polish society, it's some kind of merciful handout to Poland. For a significant portion of Polish society, it's one of the main drivers of our country's economic development. And for a large part of the Polish political class, it's an important propaganda tool, and generally, a way to conduct politics. And this state of the Polish debate about EU funds makes it terribly easy to buy us out. It's terribly easy to play us on this topic. Because what's the basic indicator for Poles? The amount. Thoughtful, how much will we get? Poland has already been very successful in winning budget negotiations. They've just begun, but we haven't won yet because we have the most money. Now the question is, do we really have the most money taking into account the number of inhabitants and a number of other factors? At this stage of the game, it's not the amount or percentage that's important, but the political mechanisms embedded in the background of this law. And it seems to me that nothing illustrates this better than the previous budget negotiations. I don't know if you remember, but Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki was so pleased with the previous budget negotiations that a billboard campaign was organized in Poland, boasting about the amount and how much money would go to Poland. Meanwhile, a large part of this money was money that the government of Mateusz Morawiecki never even saw, because the political mechanisms embedded within that budget meant this money was blocked, which was one of the reasons for the fall of that government and the change of power. And of course the Prime Minister would probably say that we were deceived, that the Commission overestimated its power, but that's an interpretation. The fact remains, there were billboards in Poland with the amount of money we would get, and that money was partially withheld. Those are facts. Further involvement in the current way of thinking about EU money is a straightforward path to a very tangible defeat. We will simply be easy to manipulate. Because this budget is designed in such a way that these traditional EU policies, which we've been using so far, agricultural policy, cohesion policy, have been repackaged into new partnerships. Although the name will likely change 80 more times, these traditional policies, under this new political roof, under the new political supervision of the European Commission, have relatively, especially in relation to inflation, a smaller share of the budget. And a new pillar is being built for new technologies, for existing, powerful companies, which will probably, with high probability, strengthen those more developed countries, those already with some developed technology.
And it would be a very big mistake on our part to try, in such a straightforward way, to simply transfer money to these current EU policies. Cohesion policy, agricultural policy, which we utilize, and set the amount as the basic determinant of whether we won or lost this negotiation. Firstly, because in addition to the amount, there are also these political mechanisms connected to this budget. That is, it's also a game about power, a political game, not just an economic one. And secondly, because in 5 to 7 years, Poland will be a country, I hope, that will need much more money for digital technologies, for armaments, for new technologies, for development, and not just for building roads. That is, we cannot be satisfied with the status of the best-paid poor in this negotiation. We have to use it in such a way that the EU budget also becomes a lever with which we can achieve real convergence, that is, a real equalization of living standards in Poland and other parts of the EU. And this won't be possible if large companies, large brands, and new technologies aren't also created in Poland. We cannot trade that for several billion euros for roads or farmers, with all due respect to roads and farmers. I mean, with the economic development of Poland, our way of thinking about EU policy has to evolve. We have to participate in a political game about power, and we also have to participate in a game about access to the sources of financing that provide the greatest economic growth, the greatest added value. Political gold is hidden there today, speaking in the language of Polish politics. This is what this game is about today, and not just how much money we will get for traditional policies that we have used. Poland is changing. Therefore, Poland's participation in the EU must change. Our character and participation in this organization must change. Therefore, our approach and understanding of the EU budget must also change.
But this isn't the only threat, because there's one more, and it's even more serious. Here, we could simply be overshadowed, because the Polish position could be relegated to a second-category country. But there's something worse. This budget could become a tool to exert pressure on the Polish internal political scene. To put it bluntly, I have fears that the current ruling camp in Poland will see the European Commission's political supervision over EU money as an excellent tool in the internal struggle within Poland. We don't have to wonder if this is possible, because it is possible. We've already seen it in the past. The question is whether it will be possible for the Polish state to be manipulated with such ease. We simply cannot allow this, for the sake of the state's interests, because the Polish state will be exploited along the lines of internal divisions. Because of the intricacy of our internal divisions, we will be easily played and marginalized in European politics. It really cannot be allowed for someone to even think about how to use this type of tool to attack political opponents on the internal political scene. But it will probably happen. Another thing is that these negotiations will end more or less when the authorities and people will be campaigning for the next parliamentary elections, if those elections take place according to the normal schedule. So this also adds a layer of complexity. The entire negotiations could be led by one government, and at the very last stage, a completely different government might take over. But to uncover all these twists and turns, we have many more months ahead. I hope this introductory material shows you our starting point, where we begin. I have great hope that you will join me in this grand political adventure, this game, a game full of twists and turns. I hope you'll follow along. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for watching this video until the very end. I'll see you next time.